Good morning and good afternoon to all. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Elsie Achubwe. I'm Director of Institutional Initiatives at the Equity and Inclusion Office at UBC. Our discussion today centers on Black underrepresentation in leadership administration. And it's the first in the speaker series entitled, Where Are All the Black People? Underrepresentation in the Academy. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to thank our event sponsors, Office of the Provost and Vice President Academic, UBC Okanagan, the Office of the Vice President Students, UBC Equity and Inclusion Office, Michael Smith Laboratories, Faculty of Science, and the Center for Culture, Identity, and Education. Joining us today to discuss Black underrepresentation in leadership administration are two esteemed guests, Dr. Charmaine Williams, Vice Dean Students, School of Graduate Studies, and Professor at the University of Toronto, and Dr. Ainsley Carey, Vice President Students at the University of British Columbia. We'll hear from each of our guests for about 20 minutes each, followed by a Q&A session, where we'll open up questions for the audience. A few housekeeping items that we'd like to share with you all. The session is being recorded. Auto transcript is enabled. ASL interpreters have been made available. And again, the Q&A function in Zoom is also enabled. Before I move on to introduction, I'll just check quickly if we're ready for a welcome. One moment. Okay. So I'm joining you today from the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Charmaine Williams is a full professor in the Factor and Watash Faculty of Social Work and currently serving as the Vice Dean of Students at the School of Graduate Studies at the University of Toronto. Previously, she has held positions as the Anti-Racism and Cultural Diversity Officer, the Associate Dean Academic for Social Work, and the Provostial Advisor on Access Programs. Her research bridges practice and access and equity issues that affect various populations, including racial minority women, LGBTQ individuals in local and international context, and individuals and families affected by serious and persistent mental illnesses. Over to you, Charmaine.
Thank you. Well, I've unmuted myself and I got my camera on, so I think that's the hardest part, right? So I am very glad to be here and regret that we're not able to gather together in the same space during these times. I'd like to briefly acknowledge the land where I am. I'm speaking to you from my home in Treaty 13 territory, which is called Toronto, the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I appreciate the time and space we give to land acknowledgements in our gatherings now, because they give me the time and space to consider how that acknowledgement is going to direct what I think, what I say, and what I do in the moments that follow. I believe that the land acknowledgement should orient us toward doing things in a way that shows respect for the people who were here before us. So today, I am using that land acknowledgement to prompt me to delve into the topic of Black representation in the Academy by first positioning myself in relation to the communities I represent and the community represented in this gathering, the Academy. I am the granddaughter of Sadie on my mother's side and Priscilla on my father's side. They were both born in Jamaica and were the descendants of slaves. They did not have the opportunity for anything more than the most basic of education. I am the daughter of Peter and Gloria, who were also born in Jamaica. I recently listened as my father told my 14-year-old son that he started working in the fields when he was a boy, because if he didn't work, he didn't eat. My mother got a little further with her education. She completed high school. They both traveled to England when they were young adults, like many others. And there they met, they married, they started a family, And they took that family to Canada because they saw limited futures for their daughters in England and hoped for better futures here. They were determined that their children would get good educations. I am the first person in my family to attend university. My sister, my brother, and I are still the only ones that have attended university. This is despite the fact that I have dozens of cousins. My father was one of 13 siblings, so I literally have dozens of cousins. They are in England, and they were all eligible for university during a period when British students did not need to pay tuition. And yet, somehow, none of them were streamed into the pathways that would have made that possible. I was the only Black person in my undergraduate programs at McMaster. I was the only Black person in my master's program at the University of Toronto. I was not the only Black person in my doctoral program at U of T, and it was in that doctoral program that I had my very first Black instructor. And this is after having completed grade school, high school, 2 undergraduate degrees, and a master's degree in this country. I was the only Black professor in my faculty for 15 years, the third Black professor since its establishment in 1914. Happily, I'm no longer the only one. So how does that accounting of my history and my family's history lead into the answer to a question about where are all the Black people in the academy? And more specifically, how does it contribute to a conversation about why don't we have more Black people in academic leadership? Because I'll be focusing on academic leadership because that's where I exist, although I expect we will be talking about various types of leadership during our time together today. I believe that one of the reasons we don't see more Black people in academic leadership is because many Black people do not have the personal and institutional legacies that position people to be in leadership. We may enter the academic space without histories of being in such spaces, without experiences that equip us to navigate the space, without allies that would mentor us in this space, and without people placed in academic institutions that even represent the possibility that we could occupy leadership positions in the space. There are others who enter the university with all of these things in place. They use that legacy and the tacit knowledge that comes along with it to chart the path toward leadership. They enter assuming it is a possibility for them, an option they can exercise. And the institution mirrors this back to them, recognizing them as people who fit. They get tapped on the shoulder to lead. This is not true for us. This is not true for many. So a partial answer to a question of how we could begin to see more Black people in academic leadership is that we would need to reveal that there is in fact a path to leadership and that some people are on the express route to that path. And that express route needs to be made visible and available to other people. The mentors, the guides, the key opportunities that remain hidden from so many of us need to be shared, or there needs to be institutional will to create different pathways that do not rely on having a specific type of legacy. And a basic contribution towards building those pathways for Black people is building and sustaining a critical mass of students, staff, and faculty members that help create the environmental conditions for Black peoples to become leaders in academic institutions. We hold that possibility of building a critical mass together with the knowledge that building that critical mass can be very lonely work. Being the first, the only, the underrepresented is lonely, hard work. But loneliness isn't all that is part of that experience of what it means to be the first, the only, or the underrepresented. It can also be about feeling alienated in these academic spaces because people don't expect you to be here. They don't anticipate that you'll be here. They don't include you when you're here. And sometimes they may be very direct in communicating that they don't want you to be here because it disrupts a status quo that from their perspective has been working just fine. Academic systems are incredibly resistant to change. I am often impressed by how universities have managed to resist change. We often hear the metaphor of universities being like big ships that are hard to steer in a new direction. But universities are people. And what we are really saying is that people in universities are hard to turn, hard to shift in a new direction. They think there is no reason for things to change. It's working just fine. It's worked fine for hundreds of years. They assert the importance of their traditions and their legacies. And when you are in that space as the first, the only, the underrepresented, you represent change. Change that will require them to do things differently. Change that will require them to move out of their comfort zones. Change that requires them to be open to things that will challenge them. Change that requires them to be decentered in the space and to share the space. And as that first, only, or underrepresented person, you come to represent and symbolize the change that people find strange or scary or hostile. And they may treat you as if you are strange, scary, or hostile. And we know that Black students, staff, and faculty members walk into universities every day and they brace themselves for the experiences that will remind them that they are viewed as strange or scary or hostile or disruptive, or the list goes on, all the ways in which the change we represent is not welcomed, is rejected, is ejected. Representing that change and bearing all that comes with it takes a toll. It can be a lonely place to be. It can be a very tense place to be. It can be a scary place to be. This is why I often talk about the importance of finding what we need to sustain ourselves in academic spaces. It's important to find the people that sustain you, find the work that sustains you, find the goals that sustain you. And because we are talking about leadership today, it is important for you to lead things you care about because that will also sustain you. Because being the first, the only, the underrepresented is really hard work. It's draining work. It's you 100% on, radar up, armor in place, thickening your skin, not making any mistakes because you can't make any mistakes, ready for what's coming because it's coming. It's all of that. And before we can even talk about being part of leadership in the academy, we need to talk about how we survive in the academy. But I don't want you to think that my story or the story of Black people in the university is only a story about marginalization and alienation. I believe universities are wonderful places. They're a place for learning and growth and transformation and freedom. People who are in universities and who come through universities can change the world and make it a better place. I still remember the very first day I stepped on a university campus for my first day at McMaster. And I looked around me and I saw possibility, endless possibility. And there have been some tough times, but I still believe universities are a space of possibility, and I want that for more people. And so we are here now, underrepresented, but we are here now. And in a moment, when I believe we can talk about what we are going to do now that we are here and now. So let's start talking about why we need more Black people in leadership in the academy. Let's talk about why universities need more Black people in positions of leadership and why I am asking Black people and others to see themselves taking leadership in the academy. We need more Black people in leadership because representation matters. It's that simple. We need Black people in places that represent the possibility that leadership is not reserved for people who are legacies, that others can be in positions of responsibility and authority in our universities. Our presence in leadership represents the possibilities for others who have not seen themselves represented. We represent the possibility that they matter, that they have a role to play, that they can be leaders in this space and leaders in other spaces. I ask more Black people to see themselves in leadership because we need to represent the possibility of more people being able to take up leadership in universities and outside of universities. We need more Black people in leadership because we need new ways of leading. I know that sometimes people are turned off from taking leadership roles because they aren't interested in having power over other people. We recoil from taking on leadership in the ways we have seen it taken up by others. I know that I myself have recoiled from that, and honestly, I don't think I have ever stepped forward and said I'm looking for a leadership position. But what I have come to understand is that there is nothing that says we need to lead in the ways we have seen others lead. We do not need to use authority or position or power in ways that we have seen it used over us and against us. We can define a different type of leadership. Leadership that is based in things like service, commitment, responsiveness, caring, social justice. I ask more Black people to see themselves taking leadership because I believe that we need to define new ways of leading universities. We need more people, more Black people in leadership because we need to be having different conversations at leadership tables. Sometimes the difference between something happening and something not happening is simply who was at the table. And I am reminded of what Shirley Chisholm said: if they don't give you a seat at the table, you bring a folding chair. I would say, if they don't give you a seat at the table, you point out that there's room at the table for all of us. And if you just adjust yourself a little, we can all be there. I believe that there are many people at those tables who are ready to adjust and make room for us all to be there. The most important thing you might be doing now to lead change might be leading a conversation with the people who can make change. So I ask that more Black people lead discussions, lead committees, lead initiatives, lead change, and make that one of the many steps towards taking leadership in academic institutions. And finally, speaking to this community, that is the academic community, a community of which I am a part, I believe we need more Black people in leadership because we need leaders who are going to change universities. The change that we represent, that some people find strange and scary, is a change toward a university that is ready to play a more meaningful role in our world. A university that is ready to be responsive to a wider range of issues in the world. I often ask myself, why should the average person working hard every day and paying taxes care that universities are here? We are centuries past being able to put up ivory towers and expect that people outside of them will let us carry on business as usual. Business as usual is not acceptable anymore. I ask Black people to see themselves in leadership because we need to be part of leading the change toward more responsive and relevant academic institutions. In closing, I want to thank you for this opportunity to reflect on why Black people in leadership positions is important to the Academy, because it was also an opportunity for me to reflect on why I have stepped forward for leadership. I recognize that I have not come from a background that predicted leadership in a university. Could my grandmothers have even imagined it? As a child attending grade school in Mississauga, Ontario, could I have imagined it? As a faculty member in a university in 2021, I not only imagine it, but I want to imagine more. I want to imagine a future where we are no longer underrepresented and we are part of a vibrant, diverse leadership in academic institutions. And I recognize that many of us have experiences in universities that would seem to more readily predict distancing ourselves rather than stepping forward for leadership. But I think that the experiences that might make us turn away may also be the experiences that compel us to step forward. We step forward because we are here, but others are not, and we must create the path for them to be here as well. I end by asking you to see the leadership that is implicit in our insistence on occupying our place in the Academy. Because while we remain part of a group that is underrepresented in such institutions, we are all leading and we are all leaders because we are leading the way for others. And I challenge all of us to see ourselves as crucial to leading the way toward universities being part of important change in our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine, for sharing those insights. And we'll next hear from Dr. Ainsley Carey. Ainsley Carey joined UBC in April 2019 as the Vice President Students. Dr. Carey has responsibility for a portfolio which includes student development and services, student housing and hospitality services, university community services, athletics and recreation, along with a number of strategic priorities, such as the well-being strategy and overseeing the newly created Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Office. Dr. Carey joined UBC from the University of Southern California, where he served as Vice President for Student Affairs from 2013 through 2019, and prior to that, Auburn University, where he served in the same position from 2009 to 2013. Dr. Carey held a faculty position in the Rossier School of Education and has served in leadership positions at Auburn University, Temple University, the University of Arkansas, and Southern Methodist University. Dr. Carey brings nearly 25 years of experience in college administration and creating educational experiences outside of the classroom. Over to you, Ainsley.
Well, thank you so much for that very kind and warm introduction. And to everyone, thank you for the time that you've taken out of your day to be with us today. UBC's Point Grey campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Like Charmaine, I am also moved by the meaning of the land acknowledgement. It is an acknowledgement that we are uninvited guests on this territory. But that acknowledgement also comes along with a responsibility, and that is a responsibility of respect and service. For the past several weeks, I've been reflecting on today and what would be the best use of your time. What information could I provide related to this topic that would be a good investment of the hour that you'll spend with us? Of course, we are all entering this space from a variety of different backgrounds, spaces, and times in our careers. So any attempt to provide one topic that covers everyone would be almost impossible. So I defaulted to the perspective that I am most familiar with. What would I like to hear a speaker talk about regarding this topic of underrepresentation in the academy? I would want to hear her story. I would want to hear her lessons. I would want to hear advice on how she arrived where she is. Charmaine shared with us the why this is important. I'm hoping that my story and the lesson that I share will address the how part of this story. So here's my story. My parents were immigrants to the United States, coming from Trinidad. I was born in New York as the third out of 4 boys. My parents divorced when I was 10 years old, and my mom, my younger brother, and I moved to South Florida. In South Florida, I went to middle school, high school, and then I attended university at the University of Florida in Gainesville. I went to the University of Florida because I wanted to play football. That was it. My interest was to continue to play the sport that I had grown up falling in love with. But while I was there, I fell in love. I fell in love with learning. I realized that if I worked really hard and if I concentrated and I got up early and I did everything that I was doing in my sport, that I actually did it in the classroom, that I could learn any subject that I wanted to. I could accomplish my goals. I graduated from the University of Florida with a bachelor's degree in economics. And then I went to work. Here I was the first member of my family to having complete a bachelor's degree. I thought that was a pretty big deal and an important accomplishment for my entire family. I went to work in retail at Walmart. I envisioned myself becoming the assistant store manager and then eventually the store manager, and perhaps move into the corporate office and becoming the CEO at Walmart. But in the first 12 months, I realized that this was not the job for me. I hated it. I tell people all the time, I work what they call the B shift in Walmart. You be there when it opened and you be there till it closed. And it was no fun. I wasn't engaged. I wasn't helping young people do anything engaging. I was moving merchandise on a shelf. That experience catapulted me back to graduate school. So I went back to the University of Florida and I was asked, so what are you interested in studying? And I said, I don't know what I want to study as a graduate program, but I know I enjoy helping young people make meaning out of life, helping people discover what's important to them and how they want to accomplish the things that are most meaningful to them. And I want to be involved in that. I was advised by a counselor at the time to pursue counselor education with a focus on higher education administration. I'd never heard of it before. I signed up for it because it sounded right. Within my first semester, I realized that this was the right program for me. It never felt like work. I always felt like I was engaged and learning and being challenged. I enjoyed every minute of it. I completed my master's degree in 2 years and then thought I was ready to head out and go to work because here I was, the first in my family to earn a bachelor's. And now I had earned a master's degree. So now it was time to go off and earn some money so that I can be a contribution to my family. Well, that same advisor who talked me into the program also said, had you ever considered earning your doctorate? I just froze because the term doctorate was never used in my family, let alone a master's degree. It was never something that we discussed. As a first generation college student, it wasn't a concept that was within my realm or scope of possibility. And I gave a half-hearted answer about, yeah, maybe someday I'll come back and I'll consider it and I'll do it in the future. That advisor said to me, while you're young and broke, stay young and broke. Pursue your doctorate because you'll have your entire life to buy a house and cars and get married and have kids, but you don't have your entire life to go to school. It gets harder once all those complications enter the scene. So he talked me into considering my doctorate, and that's exactly what I did. 2 years later, I was lifting my head up and I was writing my dissertation and completed my doctorate from the University of Florida at 28 with 1 year of work experience at Walmart. So from there, I went off to work at a number of institutions of higher education in the States, SMU, Arkansas, Temple, Auburn, USC, and now I'm here as the Vice President for Students at the University of British Columbia. At Auburn, USC, and UBC, I served as the Vice President for Students. And in all of those leadership positions, I was the one, if not one of two, senior administrators of African descent in those organizations. So I understand that experience of being one of the only there. I thought I'd use this time to share what lessons did I learn about how to cope and how to adjust and what to focus on over this 25-year career, the past 12 of those years as a senior administrator at a university. The first lesson I'll share with you by asking you this question. If we were in a live audience, you would have a chance to respond, but you don't. But I'll ask you to think about this. Are you a brand? Most people will immediately respond, no, because we're familiar with brands like Apple, Mercedes, Tim Hortons, Lululemon, McDonald's. Those are brands because they are associated with a feeling, an experience, a product, something tangible that you leave with. So we rarely think of ourselves as brands. Okay, so I'll ask you the question by adding this context. Are these brands Oprah Winfrey, Tiger Woods, Justin Trudeau, Drake, Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla? Do you think they are brands themselves? Some of you might be closer convinced that individuals could be brands. So I ask you, are you a brand? Okay, so you're not convinced. I'm going to give you some words to think about, and you picture who fits this term. Hard worker. Can you imagine anyone in your workspace that's a hard worker? Encourager, innovator. Here are some other terms. Selfish, oblivious, inconsiderate? Did someone come to mind? If someone did, individuals can be brands. Individuals in the corporate world, it's called a brand. In our world, it's called a reputation. You have a reputation that is valuable to you, just as valuable as Apple's reputation, or Starbucks' reputation, or Drake's reputation. You are a brand that is worthy of managing. Your professional dress, your social media profile, the quality of work that you submit, perhaps most importantly, your punctuality. Working in higher education, especially being one of a few members of an ethnic or cultural group or gender group, all of these things matter. Your professional dress, how you express yourself in social media, the quality of your work, and the punctuality of how you show up and when you show up. And do you do what you say you're going to do and follow through? You have a brand, and everyone around you knows your brand. It's your responsibility to find out what is that brand. The second lesson I learned in my 25 years in the profession, being one of few men of color in a space, is to be wary of conventional wisdom. Many people with very good intentions in your life will offer you good advice. Advice based on their personal experiences and their perspectives. They may have traveled the path before you and can give you sound advice on what it was like for them. Oftentimes, these perspectives are valuable pieces of information, but not for the reasons that you would traditionally expect. There's a famous story about a bumblebee and bumblebee flight. A French entomologist in the 1920s observed that bees are not aerodynamically designed to fly. They don't have the lift, the weight, the thrust, and drag, all of the principles of flight. As we understand flight, the bumblebee is essentially a basketball with pencils on the side, and it flies. The scientists decided that they would study this to understand, why does the bumblebee fly? So after a year-long analysis and using many different insects and looking at the history and the theory of flight, the scientists returned with the answer, why does the bumblebee fly? Because the bumblebee has never been told that it is not supposed to fly. Be wary of conventional wisdom. It is often informs us of what we cannot do. When we learn what we cannot do, or a trusted advisor tells us that we can't do it that way, plants the seed of doubt that stops us from being able to fly. I didn't say ignore conventional wisdom. I suggested that we would be wary of it, listen to it, use it as a piece of information to help you think of perhaps another path to accomplish your goals. But by no means think that you can't accomplish something that someone else could. All of our paths are individual narratives. Yours might be different. You are entering your university at a time and a space that's different from the people who preceded you. You are carving your own path in this profession. Do not believe that someone else's barriers also belong to you. My third lesson on this path, it always seems impossible until it's done. Here's one of my favorite stories. For more than 100 years, a single athletic feat eluded the world's best athletes, running the mile in less than 4 minutes. That's 4 laps, 1 minute each lap, 1 mile, 4 minutes. Kind of the perfect symmetry. From 1850 until 1950, thousands of men tried and failed. The clergy said this limit was set by God, and it was going to be impossible, and it's against God's will to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Doctors said that the man who accomplished this task would die of a heart attack immediately. But in 1954, Englishman Roger Bannister accomplished this historic feat, running the mile in under 4 minutes. He first did it in England and then did it right here in Vancouver, Canada at the Commonwealth Games of May of 1954. That seems like it's the end of the story, that a 100-year task was accomplished. But it's really the beginning of the story, because 46 days after Bannister accomplished this unbelievable feat, another man did the same thing. A barrier that stood for 100 years. When it was broken, another person did it. 1 year later, 3 more men did it. 3 years later, 17 more men accomplished the task. Today, thousands have broken the 4-minute mile mark. It always seems impossible until someone does it. There's something in your life that seems impossible. Maybe you're trying to complete a degree. Maybe you're thinking about writing a book. Maybe you just want to get back in shape after COVID. Your heart aspires to a position that seems out of reach. You're pursuing tenure or needing to complete a dissertation or a degree program. No matter what it is, if you work hard enough and you work long enough, you can do it. I know it seems impossible, and there are many things about life that are very difficult for us to accomplish. But there's a path. If you're willing to consider multiple options, you may have to change stories. You may have to take another path. But the thing that you most aspire to, you can accomplish if you work at it. It's been one of the most important lessons of my life. As I mentioned, I came from a family that none of us had earned a bachelor's degree. My family were immigrants to the United States. So who planted it in my head that I can go off and not just earn a bachelor's degree, but earn a doctorate? Because I was weary of conventional wisdom. And I knew if someone could do it, it could open the path for me. Here's my 4th lesson. Playing small does not serve the world. Nelson Mandela is credited with the quote, "There's no passion to be found playing small in settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living." You will be tempted in these roles to dim your light so that others are not intimidated by your knowledge and experience. Your passion for social justice may be interpreted as aggression. You, by yourself, will limit your own enthusiasm for things that you care about. Of course, there's a balance, but playing small, being less than you are capable of being, serves no one. Many of the world's disruptors were initially criticized for their disruptions because no one else was ready for it. You will enter spaces as the only one, and you may introduce a different thought, a different pattern, a different set of values that had not been introduced in that space before. And your thought or idea may go over like a lead balloon initially, but don't give up on it, because eventually the world will come around, and that idea, that innovation that you were trying to introduce will return to the surface. Many of us pre-George Floyd, pre the world pandemic, were calling signals about the inequities in our educational system. And today we're falling over ourselves trying to address those needs. And many people are kind of sitting back saying, this is what I've been talking about. The time has come for major transformation in higher education administration. You are the leaders of that future. And I'll offer my final lesson. You are uniquely designed for your purpose. One of my favorite stories is kind of the chicken and eagle story, and I'll tell this quickly and end it. There was an eagle egg that fell down a mountain and rolled down the hill and landed among a chicken coop. Well, the mother of that chicken coop rolled that egg to her nest and sat on that egg, figured it was one of her chicken eggs that broke away or got away. She nurtured that egg, and that egg finally developed, and out of that egg stepped out a baby eagle. And that baby eagle, looking around at his brothers and sisters who were chickens, thought that it was a chicken. So he hopped around like a chicken, tried to do all the things that chickens do, eat off the ground like a chicken. But one evening, the adult chickens got together and said, "This is not a chicken. This is an eagle, but he thinks he's a chicken. So let's not say anything, because if he ever finds out that he's really an eagle, it could be trouble for all of us." So they continued to convince this baby eagle that he was a chicken. One day out in the yard, this baby eagle saw flying above the beautiful, majestic wings of an eagle flying by, the shadow of a 6-foot wingspan. And that adult eagle, seeing this baby eagle hopping around this chicken coop, flew down to the chicken coop and asked the baby eagle, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm trying to be the best chicken that I can be." And that adult eagle said, "Boy, you ain't no chicken. Get out of here and fly with me." There are many times in your life that you will be persuaded to believe that this is your lot in life. You may have aspirations that are unimaginable, but because of the circle that you may be gathered with, those aspirations may not develop, may not take flight, may not take shape. Elevate the crowd that you are associated with. Pursue your wildest dreams. Stop trying to be like someone else. Focus on being your best self. What I learned in my 20+ career in college administration that helped me get to this point is that I am part of a brand. Everything I say and do matters. The quality of my work matters. My punctuality matters, not only for me, but those who are coming after me, others who are considering these roles. I know I am blazing a trail for other young administrators who will step into these roles. I want everyone that's here right now to know that there's a tremendous amount of potential in you. Second, be wary of conventional wisdom. There's good advice, but realize some of that advice might be different. It always seems impossible until you actually do it. So work hard and keep trying at it. You will break through. Playing small doesn't serve anyone. Don't dim your light and your talent because you do not want to intimidate others. Find opportunities to be respectful, to be assertive, to be informative, to be hardworking, to be courageous, to be innovative in the space that you master, because there's something that you know, that you have the capacity to deliver that others around you cannot. Don't dim that light. And finally, you are designed for a purpose. Stop trying to be like someone else. I want to thank you for your time today, and hope my words and Charmaine's words have been encouraging to your path and your journey. That ends my comments. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ainsley, for sharing those thoughts and experiences, and those key lessons over your time. This brings us to the question and answer portion of today's session. So as I mentioned previously, the Q&A function has been enabled. So we'd like to go ahead and invite our viewers at this time to submit any questions they may have for our guest speakers. And while folks are percolating on questions they may have, I wonder if I can go ahead and pose a question to our speakers. You both spoke of the experience of being the first, of being the only. Charmaine, you mentioned specifically the alienation, the piece around survival, and the need to sustain. So my question to both of you, speaking to that loneliness that can happen when you are the singular voice, the first or the only, the representation of Blackness in a leadership role, What has helped to alleviate that loneliness in your own experiences? What proved meaningful for you? And how did you seek and find support and community in your own time?
Charmaine, would you like to offer the first response?
Okay, sure. I think if I reflect on my own experience, that it was both things within the university and beyond the university that helped with that. So first, I think it's so important for us to have whole lives that sustain us, whatever it is that we're doing. So, in many ways, like friendships that I had, family that I had, spirituality that I had, these are all things that helped through the more difficult times. And I also think that I had a rather pivotal experience. I mean, I mentioned that when I was in my doctoral program, I wasn't the only Black student, but I was in a cohort with just a really excellent group of people that represented this range of identities in terms of gender and race and religion and backgrounds and experiences, sexuality. And I think in some ways it really showed me the possibility for people being able to connect across differences and support each other through all kinds of, like, we were all going through different kinds of things. And we really supported each other through that. And they continue to be my best colleagues, this group of people. So I think, because that first year especially was difficult for various reasons. And I'm grateful that they were there with me. And so, moving forward, I think that what I have always done is really try to be open to the possibilities of allies and collaborators and partners and people that are my people around me. And certainly while I might, walk into rooms and often scan to see, are there any other Black people? Are there any other people of color here? Or, and often, unfortunately, the answer is no, but you can't make assumptions about who these people in the room are, because I've often reflected that if I'd made such assumptions, there are some really good relationships I would have missed out on, really good, like, years long, lifelong partnerships that I would have missed out on. So I'd say that would be my advice to people, like, definitely, like, just recognize that making those connections is required. It's just absolutely required. Yeah. And then be open to where they can emerge.
I would almost like to ditto Charmaine's observations there. I think those are spot on pieces of advice. I would add, these things take time, right? So realize that enter the first year in any new environment, the first year of almost anything new job, new university, new relationship, first year of law school, first year in a profession, is the toughest year because there's so many transitions going on, not only the cultural aspects of the new space that you're entering, but the learning curve of what's going on. So realize that the advice that Charmaine and I offer is not overnight advice. You won't wake up tomorrow and suddenly be renewed in your ability to cope and adapt in a space. It does take time. The second piece of advice that I would add is, I came to realize later in my career that my work is not my identity. Having, as Charmaine mentioned, a holistic life where outside of work, you have friends and colleagues, you read, you write, you exercise, you swim, whatever it is you do, make sure you have multiple anchors in your life that when something seems awry in any place in your life, you have something to lean back on. You have other things that also spark joy for you. A project you may be working on, or a movie that you're producing, or a podcast that you're editing. Find multiple things in your life that you find joy in. So when things get rough at work, which they usually will, you have outlets that can help you sustain through those difficult times.
Thank you both. There are a number of questions rolling in. I think one we could turn to next. Institutions continue to state year after year that institutional change is needed and change is necessary, particularly when it comes to increasing opportunities for Black people and people of color, POC, and providing spaces for these people to thrive. However, time and time again, we've seen these promises deferred, changed, and even forgotten. How do we combat or mitigate institutional betrayal without falling into jaded territory?
I'll start since Charmaine started the last one. I thought this was a part of Charmaine's original comments as well, thinking about institutional change and how we envision universities as large ships that we're trying to turn around. And at the end of the day, universities are really about people, right? People whose attitudes need to be turned around and changed. Although the rhetoric has existed for quite some time about the value of equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think it's been spouted for decades. It hadn't been fully adopted at the levels of the institution that not provide leadership, but those that move the chains every day that make things happen in a university. So although the president or senior leaders may say equity, diversity, and inclusion is valuable, there's a level of leadership and management at the university that sometimes hold critical changes back. They've been there for 25, 30 years, entrenched in the systems of how it's always been done. And no matter what the senior leaders say, they implement change based on the set of values that they had developed and the things that they hold precious and dear. And perhaps that's where the biggest changes in the universities need to happen as we look at those levels of management that actually move things forward. Because we all know the senior leaders are on term positions and they're out in 5 to 10 years, but mid-management, they're there for quite some time. I do feel like in the 2 decades that I've been in college administration, we are living in a turning point. We are watching history happen around us. The death of George Floyd, the global pandemic, and the awakening that has happened, I don't think we will ever be able to unravel this. And this is the time to see the real change that universities have been promising for a long time. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some persistence and constantly reminding us of this moment. And we need leadership to continue to do that. But I empathize with the viewers' comment that it seems like we've been talking about this forever.
Well, as Ainsley said, I mean, I would certainly echo what he said. And the only thing I would add is I think there's something to about, well, 2 things. One is Ainsley spoke exactly to what I was thinking. Part of the issue is that leadership turns over, and with them goes, you know, the work. Suddenly people have like this amnesia for the things that we were working on. And then also people get removed from the system. And I think, I mean, I think we know that we've seen across universities a way that Black people are particularly being removed from staff positions, Indigenous people being removed from positions. And so what goes with them is the work that they were doing. So there's a piece here that's around sustaining people in those positions and sustaining like the memory of those things. And then the other piece I was going to speak to is we have to seize our moments. So one of the things I've been struck by is that there are things that we were told couldn't happen, that when a pandemic happened, suddenly there were resources, there were ways, you know, things that, you know, we couldn't possibly do. We did, we just did it, right? So now, you know, as I've been saying to people, you know, you'd never wished for a pandemic, but what's the legacy of this pandemic? Well, what possibilities has it shown us that now we don't get to pretend aren't possible?
Yeah.
So we have to seize our moments. A pandemic can be a moment. Black Lives Matter and that what happened with George Floyd produces a moment. Truth and reconciliation produces a moment. Yeah. These moments don't last forever.
Right.
So within those moments, what are we doing to embed it in the institution in a way that makes it hard to then pretend it doesn't exist and makes it hard to take it out?
Yeah.
This is the work of my term.
Thank you both. I think there are a couple of questions that have rolled in that really speak to this piece around seizing the moment, but address through intimidation and fear, right? When you're working to turn a large ship around, how does one work through that intimidation and fear? The question is, can you talk a bit more about how to bravely make significant changes in academia as a lone Black leader? And I think a similar and related question, how do you reaffirm your beliefs in the face of institutional opposition that may deliberately or inadvertently undermine your views? And I think that's critical in these moments you've identified as sort of these critical change moments.
Charmaine, would you like to start?
We're taking turns, I guess. So I'll start with intimidation and fear. I mean, there's a part of me that just wants to say that you have to feel the fear and do it anyway. I actually think one of my, I'd like to believe, maybe I'm kidding myself, but I'd like to believe that one of my talents is that I can be really scared and not look it. And so I feel, and I have this conversation with my son who's 14 years old, that sometimes you're afraid, but you just have to do it anyway. And so I think releasing ourselves from a belief that at some point we're just going to feel completely relaxed, this is all going to go away. There are moments like that. There certainly are, but there are moments like if you're pushing against a tide or promoting a change or telling people things they're not ready to hear, the fear comes with that, and you just have to do it anyway. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to do it. Some of us, I use my superpower, I can do that. Other people, it's not their time to do it, or they're not at the place where they can do it. But when you can do it, I think you need to do it. So, and then the other piece is, I think, also allies. I think it's important that in this gathering, as I understand it, we have students, staff, and faculty. It's very important for us to be forming alliances across groups so that we are supporting each other and are, have each other's backs in these situations. And that's across, when I say across groups, it's not just across students, staff, and faculty, but across equity-seeking groups. We all need to have each other's backs, because we're all out there telling people things they don't really want to hear, representing change that they're not ready to make. And so we need to support each other in that work.
I would add to that, I believe there's a quote that goes along with this notion of fear, that courage is not the absence of fear, but it is going forward in spite of fear, right? That is what real courage is. Now, let me also add, I can say that to you as a 20+ year college administrator, multiple degrees, worked at 6 institutions of higher education. I could attest to a level of courage based on the wealth of experience that I've built and knowledge that I've built, that I know which buttons to press on and which things to advance and which opportunities to say, this isn't the right space to make this point, right? And that comes along with time and experience. So, consider your stage in your career, where you are right now, and how you want to enter the spaces and be represented in the space. It's perhaps not in my first year that I decide to challenge the university's board of trustee and administration about a policy, right? But as a 25-year veteran in the profession who feels comfortable about what I know and how I know it, and comfortable about my options outside, I don't mind challenging the system. But I would not offer that as the remedy for everyone. I do think there is a part of your career where it's about building it before you tear it down, right? Now, I know the activist in you wants to say, let's tackle the system right now, but there should be elders at our universities who are in better positions to do those things. And you can provide support and guidance and enthusiasm, but don't be discouraged if you only have 2 or 3 years under your belt. You're trying to take on a 150-year institution and you feel like you can't do it in 7 days, right? So please know that as you build your career, that confidence and courage will come along, and you will be comfortable knowing what are the things that I could challenge. There are stages of your career where you should be more reflective and listening rather than attack mode. I am at a place and in a position that I can be more assertive about certain things, because it is the expectation of UBC that we advance these issues. And sometimes doing that is not pretty all the time. So I am comfortable challenging things, but I don't think that is true for everyone at every stage of their career and in every industry.
I think continuing on that thread you've just mentioned about building your career, there's a question that asks, what is the best investment that you made in yourself to support your progression on this leadership path?
I'll start off with an answer. One of the investments was I said yes to everything. So whenever there was a committee or labor or something to do, nothing was below me. I went to it all. I saw as many things as I could. When I had the time in my young career, right? You know, if they needed someone to serve on a committee, work on a task force, I said yes. Even if that task force was completely opposite from my day-to-day work or something that I understood, I didn't mind learning. The second thing that I would advise for those, especially those working in the academy, chances are your university offers some type of tuition benefit or discount as a function of your employment. It is perhaps the most underutilized university benefit. I would encourage everyone to pursue a degree program, even if you already have one, whether it's a minor, a certificate, but use the university's tuition benefit and earn degrees in spaces that you are intellectually curious in, not just for the sake of earning degrees, but you are intellectually curious. And for example, I earned a degree in law, a master's in law, and an MBA, while one at Auburn and one at USC, because I was intellectually curious about it. And these were all during times when I was a vice president. I didn't know where a law degree and an MBA would take me. Years later, UBC called and said, hey, would you be interested in coming here? We notice you also have, right? So I think my greatest investment was saying yes to opportunities, but also being a continuous learner, constantly learning something and utilizing that university benefit in tuition benefits to advance my portfolio, my experience, but also my knowledge. So I feel like I can enter a room and no one can say he doesn't know this. That has been my responsibility.
Wow, that's such a great answer. I'm actually a bit stumped thinking, what have I done to invest in myself? My first answer actually was, I was thinking a deep and enduring meditation practice. That was like one of the best investments I made in myself. And that has been an investment that has paid off for decades. I think aside from that, I mean, I think when I have the moments to sort of think about something I want to do for myself, it's reaching out and like meeting new people and learning new things, like you said, Ainsley. And partly, especially in a university, that is also about connecting with the best things about a university, that people are doing things, talking about things, thinking about things that are interesting and amazing every single day. And I find it very important to connect with that as part of being in this space.
Thank you. And you've both stressed the importance of connection and building relationship and network. There are a couple of questions that have come in, a few people asking to the similar gist. What is the work of allies? How do people be better allies to their Black colleagues? Mm-hmm. And in particular, for those who are already in positions of privilege, individuals of privilege currently in leadership positions, how do they be effective allies?
I guess it's my turn to start, eh? I mean, the question to me about allies, it's always a question about not only how can somebody be a better ally to me, but how can I be a better ally to others? So I think this is, you know, when I talked about Shirley Chisholm and creating the space at the table, I think that part of what allies do is make that room at the table and say, hey, there's somebody missing at the table here, or we need to rejig the table here to do this. And I hope that that is something that I do for others. And this is something that I hope that others do for me, depending on what the issues are. And remembering that sometimes, like, it's, you know, we get used to thinking of ourselves as experts and people that speak on things and, you know, all this sort of thing, but sometimes it's really important to step back and just not do that, right? So sometimes, you know, the best thing you do as an ally is just stepping back and not doing that, and finding ways to bring other people into the space, because, you know, often we'll talk about giving people a voice, but it's not about us giving a voice to somebody. It's about shutting up and letting those other voices come through.
Mhm. I would add to that response. Recently, there's been a lot of conversation around this particular question, where allies have said, you know, please, what can I do to be more helpful? And a number of diversity-seeking groups or equity-seeking groups have said, you know, it's a lot of labor to attempt to advise everyone on how to do this work. So they've said, do the work, read a book, watch a movie, and then check that work with someone else to say, hey, I noticed this, or I read this book on privilege, and I wanted to bounce it around with you to see if this makes sense, right? If what I understand is correct. So do the work and perhaps check the work with those communities that you are attempting to support. So rather than watching the Netflix documentary or reading the book and then attempting to launch a program, consult with those communities to say, here's an observation that I've had or something that I've learned, and I want to make sure that this is true on the ground, right? So kind of ground truth, the things that we're learning and observing. And I think that's what good allies do. Instead of saying, let me go launch this great program that I found, let me go check with people to make sure that this is something that would add value and is the best use of our time. This notion of speaking up in spaces that you have privilege, and in fact, sometimes risking your privilege. So I, as a man, know that in my circle, my gender has privilege. So I try to pay attention to when the balance of the room may make other genders have less privilege. And wherever I can, I will try to observe and say, wait a minute, Amy made that exact same point. And now Philip made the same point, and we're giving Philip credit for the point Amy just made, right? Like, I try to acknowledge those inconsistencies at risk of my own privilege, right? I think there are spaces and places where allies have privilege, and they don't speak up for fear of risking that membership. That's something that is very supportive to groups. And the last one that I would add is similar to Charmaine's point about make room for other voices. Sometimes the best response is to not respond and allow other voices who are waiting their turn to get in, let those other voices speak first, and share that space, but make space for other voices. I think is good allyship and ally work, but I can't emphasize consultation enough. It's one thing that I've learned and valued here at UBC, the value of consultation with groups before action, not after action.
Thank you for that. Another question, the comment reads, I'm truly inspired by your words. Dr. Nelson, you spoke about building the critical mass. How do we start that? And where should we start? And then a question specifically for Dr. Carey, in what activities are you engaged in to blaze the path for others at UBC? Could you speak to some of those?
So I'll start off about activities around blazing paths. So one of the things I'm very focused on is student representation on campus. My first year at UBC pre-COVID, I did a lot of listening sessions with a variety of student communities and groups just to hear, tell me about your student experience. That's essentially my question. And so many students have shared with me such great insights about what it feels like to be a student here, whether it's a student of color, international student, domestic, LGBTQ community, Indigenous students. Tell me about your experience. And what I heard from many students of color were the issue of representation in the classroom, feeling like they're in a degree program with 1,000 other students and they are the only one in all of their classes, and how threatening that feels and how uncomfortable that is. The absence of faculty members of color, like Charmaine's story, my story also was I went through, 12-year K through 12, and it was in graduate school before the first time I saw a Black professor. And it was like a unicorn in class to me. And I wish that he was teaching all of my classes, because I had never been instructed from K through college with Black male leadership in a classroom. So I am emphasizing and working hard with the Anti-Racism Task Force and Santa Ono on how do we work on increasing representation on campus, recruitment of students, but also supportive environments for faculty and staff who are here, and creating pathways for more faculty of color, not just Black faculty, but faculty of color to find their space at UBC. If I focus on students for a second, we're working on a program called Beyond Tomorrow Scholars, where we're committed to recruiting every year a class of incoming Black students and offering them scholarships, students from all throughout Canada, offering them scholarships to come to University of British Columbia, and eventually build that critical mass of students. It will take time, it will take effort, but we also need to recruit them and then support them while we're here. So Beyond Tomorrow is really a leadership program that's about recruitment, but it also has a strong retention focus where we make sure that we can help those students stay enrolled. And students help recruit more students. So as we build that critical mass in the student body, that's important. And part of the retention is making sure they see diversity in the faculty. So I'm excited that our provosts on both campuses are committed to diversifying the faculty. So those have been just a few of the important initiatives that are taking off. There's an anti-racism task force that I am a co-lead on, and they are early in their work, but as they produce their work, my commitment is to make sure those things happen.
So I suppose I'll speak more to the critical mass issue, though it's certainly very happy and interested to hear about all the work that's happening at UBC. And similarly, U of T also has a lot of activities going on now around, I mean, some of them quite directly at the idea of building a critical mass. So the idea of cluster hires and things like that. And other things, like, I mean, for me, a lot of that critical mass work comes down to mentoring people into the environment. And that mentorship may happen individually, but of course, a lot of us don't actually have those mentors in our world. So I think we have to create those opportunities. And I see a lot of good work happening around mentoring people from underrepresented groups so that they can, so that they feel more ready and they are better prepared to actually show what they are able to do in the university space. I do think, though, that often people think that they can't do mentoring until they're like at some, elevated place. And the truth is, if you've made it one step ahead of somebody else, and you've got some mentoring you could be doing for somebody else, right? And this is how we start to build those networks and those supports, those allies, those collaborators, our people that support us through these situations. So I think a lot of what I would point to is mentoring. The other thing I'd say is refusing to be purged from the system because sometimes it feels there are things that are trying to shake you out of the institution, and I say you refuse to go.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And you both talked about, again, the piece around pathways, right? And Ainsley, earlier you mentioned as well, sort of that critical change point at the leadership and management levels in universities. I'm wondering if I could ask you both to say a little bit more about how you define the sort of the scope of a university's responsibility to really shed light on those pathways. Speaking to Charmaine, a bit of what you mentioned earlier, really just revealing the pathway, right, for Black folk to step into leadership roles. Is there anything more you would say around what the scope of responsibility is for universities in particular?
Okay, I'll jump into this one, Charmaine. I mentioned in my story that my parents were immigrants to the United States. They came from Trinidad. And a lot of my identity, as I grew up and started to realize it, is shaped by that immigrant story. So my father and mother expected no one to give them anything. So they worked. days, nights, weekends. They did whatever they needed to do to support our family. They worked really hard. And I remember watching this as a kid, watching my mom or dad get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to catch the subway to get to their work location, and coming home late at night and cook. I just remember this tremendous work ethic that I was observing as a kid. So with that framework, let me attempt to answer this question about the university's responsibility for providing a path for you. From the immigrant perspective, they have no obligation to provide you a path. For me, it was my responsibility to blaze that trail. A lot of people provided good advice along the trail that I was taking, conventional wisdom, which I mentioned, conventional wisdom based on their story, to which, as I mentioned in my comment, sometimes tells you what not to do rather than what to do. Because I was blazing a trail in spaces that no one was there before me. So I am a senior administrator, Black male, at a university that has never had a Black male in this path before. So who is to advise me, right? So anyone offering advice at this stage in my career, they're making it up, right? They may tell me that I've done something wrong, give me some feedback, that's great. But I do think there are points of your career where I often use this: choose the path that gives you the most options. Whether you are considering a degree program, a career opportunity, and the path that gives you the most options is not the easiest path. It's the road less traveled that no one has been on. But when you conquer that road, you have multiple options. You can become a university professor, you can be a vice president, you can be the president of you have multiple options. You pursue another degree program, so you create multiple options for yourself. And then you decide, rather than waiting for the university to tell you which path to take. The great thing about the university is that there's so many options, there's so many avenues. There isn't one way to become the dean of an academic program. There isn't one way to be the president nor the vice president. All of these professions within the university have multiple ways to get there. So I'm often leery about trying to say, here's the path, because chances are as soon as they get on it, it will be wrong. So the path is really your heart. What do you desire? What are you willing to work for? What are you going to get up late? When you get knocked down, will you get back up because that thing excites you so much? Will you find other ways to accomplish it? So the path is really carved in your heart and what you believe in. I hesitate to say that the university is going to hand me a script that says, here's the path to something that we have never seen before. I just don't think it's realistic.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with that part about choosing a path that gives you the most options. I always say, like, the decision that opens your options is a good one. Beware of the ones that close them down.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that the institution has some responsibilities, and that's partly because I believe a pathway exists, and I believe that not all of us get to see it, right? So some people get shown the way,
Mm-hmm.
and others do not. I mean, they don't even know that doorway is there. They don't, or they're diverted in other directions. So I think there's at least the responsibility and accountability for making those pathways more visible. But where I think I come back around to what Ainsley is saying is that is a path to a particular type of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said in my remarks, I don't believe that the inherited models of leadership we have are actually what the university needs right now. I think we need different ways of leading. So sure, you take responsibility for making that pathway more visible, create different types of pathways, be open to different types of pathways. This is the institutional responsibility in my mind, but don't assume that we all have to end up like the leaders that went before us.
Yeah. And I'd also add to that, don't wait on the path, right? Ask for it, like pursue, professional development, conferences, seminars, workshops, ask and a part of the process rather than kind of passively waiting for the path to be delivered to you. I would agree with Charmaine that the university does have a responsibility in this space, but if you wait on them to deliver on that responsibility, sometimes you could be disappointed. I hope the world is heading in a different place around this, but don't wait. Ask for mentors, ask for advice, meet with people of all genders, backgrounds, cultures, and say, hey, I want to do the job that you're doing. What would it take? Many people at the university I found will be helpful if you initiate.
All right. Thank you both so much for your comments, for your insights, for your thoughtful remarks. I think this brings us to a close of the question and answer section. I just again want to thank our guest speakers, Charmaine Williams and Ainsley Carey, for sharing so much of yourselves with us today. Thanks to all of the viewers for joining in on this conversation. And finally, thanks again to our event sponsors and to all of those who have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event a success. Please do stay tuned for the next session featuring Black women in STEM, I believe on April 16th at 10 a.m. Pacific. I want to thank everyone again for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Charmaine, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Elsie, thank you. Well done.
Thank you all.